All right, we are live. Welcome, fellow Spellbreakers, to another edition of the Spellbreakers podcast. We have a guest returning to the podcast for a second time, Mr. Montalk, absolute legend, a man who needs no introduction, but we will give it again out of respect. First, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Eric, at MACE Life Catalyst. I have his email on the screen. It is ericmace at macelifecatalyst.com. For those of you who may not know, Eric is a practitioner of the MACE Energy method. It is a very effective way to release energetic blockages and trauma without having to actually divulge what you're going through very rapidly. I did a session with Eric. It was 2 hours, and it was I felt like I lost 100 pounds. I felt way better. I was carrying a lot of things that he helped me to let go. Eric is a really good guy. Reach out to him if you want to learn more about his service and what he does. And as well, he doesn't charge if he doesn't help you. And he's honored that with all of my guests. And so reach out if you're somebody who's dealing with emotional blockages and energy blockages and you haven't been able to get past it. He's one way to do that. So, without further ado, we have the legendary Tom Montalk, montalk.net. He is an author, researcher, philosopher, scientific futurist, and just absolute legend as far as I'm concerned. He is an author of such books as Transcending the Matrix Control System 1 and 2, Discerning Alien Disinformation, Fringe Knowledge for Beginners, and of course his latest, Gnosis, Alchemy, Grail Arc, and the Demiurge. If you want to support him, please buy all of his books. You'd be a fool not to. As well, go to montalk.net. It is probably the most interesting website I've ever seen. Tom's been adding to it for what feels like millennia, categorizing some of the deepest spiritual and consciousness and reality and alien insights I've ever seen. So, without further ado, Tom, welcome to the podcast. How have you been?
Been pretty busy, but looking forward to getting back into podcasts because I took a break from them over the summer, like doing video stuff. But yeah, I think I'm ready to do a number more. So you're the first video podcast I've done in like 3 months.
Oh, wow.
Glad to be here.
Wow, I'm very honored. And as well, my understanding is you are working on some kind of free energy projects or scalar physics projects. Are you able to dive into a bit of what you've been getting up to in your absence? Or
Well, so on the technology side with science and so on, I've been doing a lot of high voltage research lately, thanks to a friend of mine who helped me purchase some 100 kilovolt power supplies so they can shoot sparks about this long. It's amazing for Biefeld-Brown type anti-gravity research, so I've been working on that. I've also been working on this device here, which I'll hold up to the camera, first time anyone's seen it. This is actually a unit that I'm working on, which I might make available. It's called the ESP783, and what it is, it's an enhanced, highly advanced Schumann resonance magnetic field generator. So as you know, the Earth has a magnetic field, and it vibrates at the Schumann resonances, like 7.83 hertz and 14.3 hertz, and like 5 different frequencies. The problem is, some of the other devices out there that try to mimic that in your home, they only do one frequency at a time. But I figured out how to do all 5 at the same time. And other programs that allow also brainwave pulsing, like gamma, 40 hertz, for example. And yeah, so anyway, I'm still working on it. It's a prototype at the moment, but I might announce it probably within a month or two if people want to pick one up. Yeah, so that's what I've been working on. In terms of scalar physics, that is something that you really have to nail mathematically first before you do it in experiment. Because the issue is there are no off-the-shelf instruments that can measure scalar waves, which are they're waves that are beneath what we call electricity, magnetism, and gravity. So they're like one step down beneath that. And so all the instruments that we have, they can only measure that top surface level stuff, But the deeper stuff, the deeper potentials, as they call them, there's no real instruments to measure that. So how do you build something if you can't even measure if it's working, right? If it's putting out anything. So you have to do it all mathematically first, then build it, and then try to build the instrument to measure it. See, it's a long process. But yeah, I'm working on it. So that's pretty much what I've been doing besides, research and being on social media, doing Twitter spaces and, just networking with people.
Wow, no big deal. Just doing scalar physics in between building Schumann resonance devices. Yeah, I'd love to get my hands on one of those and try it out sometime, and even offer it to our guests on the podcast. If yeah, we'll talk offline about that. But very cool,
Yeah.
and yeah, guys, check out Tom as well for any updates on that. But yeah, you know what? Why don't we start there? Because I know I've heard from the grapevine that you actually have consulted on different types of free energy initiatives and projects, and so I'd love to get your take on the free energy landscape. So for me, I started with a young teen, the becoming aware of the Stanley Meyer water car. All right, there's a few of those guys who seemed to develop water cars, and then they all died. And then
Mhm.
there seems to be a lot of claims of over unity devices. As well, there seems to be in kind of black projects, or people claim like Bob Lazar and such, and even Stephen Greer, that there are these devices that could basically power a house that are being suppressed. And even our boy Ashton Forbes there for a little bit was claiming that he had access to these types of devices. So I would love to get your take on, let's just say, the landscape broadly of free energy devices, the different types, how they work, and then your take. Do these things work? Do you think this actually could be in the realm of possibility to make it public? Yeah, Mr. Montauk.
Okay, yeah. So it's definitely possible, and it has been done by different inventors. The problem is they tend to get bought out, killed, you know, poisoned. I know. See, I used to have a friend in Virginia. He was an older gentleman, and he was an inventor. He was an engineer. He was an inventor. I knew him for a couple years, and I visited his awesome like house in the countryside. And when you walk in, even the kitchen was full of electronic equipment everywhere because he ran out of space in all the other rooms. So he was like a real smart guy, and he had a couple trailers, like actual semi truck trailers, parked in the back. With one was filled with a machine shop, the other one with another electronics lab. So he was like living it 24/7. Anyway, he invented a number of devices, and the last thing he invented was an engine that ran on water, not through typical electrolysis, but actual just pulling energy out of the ethers, I guess, and using the water as a storage mechanism for it. And he called me on the phone saying that he finally got it working. And I said, okay, yeah, well, earliest I can visit you is in maybe 2 weeks or so. In that time, his heater unit malfunctioned and he got carbon monoxide poisoning. So he wound up in the hospital for that, with brain damage. And then while in the hospital, he was diagnosed with colon cancer, like a rare aggressive form of it. And within 2 weeks, he was dead. Maybe a coincidence, but it's actually within the pattern of what I've heard of other inventors as well, like Stanley Meyer, because he mentioned Stan Meyer. So Stan Meyer, he invented a way of also running engines on water. He used a different method though, but yeah, his final moments were standing up, yelling that he's been poisoned, and falling over dead at a restaurant where he was about to sign a contract with some investors to start manufacturing his technology. Now, skeptics will say, well, he just probably had a heart attack or something like that. But I mean, come on, the timing of that, he could have died in his home. He could have died the next day. Happened to be right before he signed that contract. I don't think so. I think it's a very suspicious thing. And of course, the CIA, during the Church Commission back in the 70s, I think they admitted that they had heart attack guns. And this was 50 years ago. So nowadays, they probably have, non-contact electronic forms of stopping someone's heart. So it's hard to tell nowadays, what is mere natural death and what is an artificial death. But, I started my path with energy research back when I was 13. It's because I was doing a lot of research on UFOs and abductions, the whole like ufology field. And what I found most fascinating is descriptions of alien warp drives or engines or anti-gravity engines that abductees would see. And they would describe, the mechanism and what they saw. So I was like, wow, what if that's really possible? Like, how can we replicate it? So I started researching fringe inventions, and I signed up for a catalog from the back of Popular Science magazine. It was called Rex Research in folios. And I ordered a ton of these in folios, which were on, Stan Meyer at the time, John Eklund, a lot of other researchers, Byfield, the Thomas Townsend Brown, and several others. So I started doing experiments in these. Now, back then, I didn't really have a good machine shop, so my contraptions, being a young teen, were kind of crappy by modern standards. Um, but so I didn't succeed in getting over Unity, but I learned the principles of how these things worked. And so when I went to college for physics and electrical engineering, I started getting the math background to start understanding how it might work. But it took me another 10 years after leaving college to really start nailing the mathematics and looking for the hidden parts of physics as to how it works. And you see, that is the key, because there are inventors out there working in their garages or basements who they stumble upon this amazing technology that defies all physics, and they get it working, but they don't know the real reason why it works. So they have to come up with their own theory about how it works, but a lot of times they don't have a math background or physics background. So, they might say, oh, there's these little gyroscopic particles that are in the ether and they flow this way and that way. Or it's like, or what's his name, Lead Skalanen, who built Coral Castle. He talked about these magnetic monopoles that come out of batteries and you can do things with them. Well, I think all these theories, they are approximations or maybe half-truths. It's like, it's good enough to explain maybe how their device works, but it's not the real truth. So therefore you can't really expand it to other technologies. So the thing is, they had problems replicating their technology with others, or scaling it up, for example, because their understanding was only limited to their little accidental discovery, that they developed. So what I'm saying is, if you understand the theoretical background to it, then you can work within the math realm, figure out what the optimal maximization of energy is per particular setup. Then you can engineer it. So for me, 90% of what I've done is on the theoretical mathematical side, because I learned the hard way many years ago that if you just dive straight into experiment, you're going to do a lot of trial and error, and that gets really time consuming and extremely, extremely expensive. So as far as the survey of free energy goes, well, you've got, so back, centuries ago, people would start with just perpetual motion machines, ways of using momentum and energy of balls moving or water flowing or something like that to kind of shuffle things around and trying to trick nature into looping back upon itself. So you get perpetual spinning wheel or, something like that. The issue with that is you're still working entirely within the realm of Newtonian physics, which has no surprises. I mean, it has been fully mapped out. There's really no surprises there, and there's no free energy in there because everything is conserved. All the energy is conserved. There's nothing special about it. So those kinds of devices, they don't work. Okay. Then they moved on to magnetic perpetual motion, where you somehow take a wheel, put a bunch of magnets on it, and try to hold another magnet to it, and you think that the repulsion would somehow cause all the magnets to keep repelling, and therefore the wheel would keep spinning. But that doesn't work either necessarily, because magnetic forces are also relatively conserved. There's no extra energy that you get from it. Okay, fine. So then they moved on to plasma technologies and using electromagnetic fields. See, now that's where it starts getting interesting, because once you have electromagnetic fields, now you're engaging time. You're engaging the flow of space-time, the flow of the ether, and you start warping things slightly with all that energy that's fluctuating. And then you do start resonating with a greater etheric energy field, the zero-point energy field, and you can start exchanging energy with it, pulling it in or putting energy into it, which if you start putting energy into the surrounding ether all around you, you start changing the physical constants that make everything run. So for example, like this giant mug of water here, my beer stein, man, I'm always using water props, but that's what I have handy. Okay. So this thing here, right now, this is a liquid at room temperature because that's the way that the intermolecular forces work. But these forces, they depend on the electric constant. So on Coulomb's constant. And if you change that constant, you can change how much the water molecules attract each other. And when you do that, then what you get is, well, you can make water freeze at room temperature because you make the things attract each other so much that, they come together like they do in ice. Or conversely, you can chill water down to, minus 50 degrees and it would still stay liquid because you've now made sure that the forces aren't very strong because you weaken them. And I've actually done experiments over the past year and a half where I took water and I exposed it to essentially a rotating aluminum disc with a magnet on it. And the eddy currents, like the interaction between the magnetic field and the spinning disc, caused internal currents within it that generated essentially scalar waves, like it's longitudinal waves. And I accidentally discovered it because all the water in my freezer, which I was trying to freeze, for alchemy experiments. Go figure. But anyway, so all the water in my freezer would not freeze, even though it got down to a measure like 5 degrees above zero. The water wouldn't freeze. When it froze like the previous month or two, I mean, they'd freeze fine every night. But this night, when after I did this experiment with the magnetic spinning thing and, the energy beam going towards the freezer area by accident, yeah, the water wouldn't freeze. So I realized that, these forces in the water were being affected by this magnetic spinning disk experiment. And so then I put that into a simulation, a physics simulation, to figure out what the currents were doing inside the disk. And I realized, oh, yeah, of course, according to the math, which I had already figured out, that is exactly the setup you would need to generate a particular kind of scalar energy beam, which then ends up, affecting the water in the freezer. So anyway, that's like a component of my life, just doing experiments and, trying to iterate upon my knowledge and my research, and doing research online, doing research in my back room here, and just, making discoveries along the way. Now, you mentioned rumors that I have been consulting on various free energy projects and so on. So it's nothing government related. It's not like I'm working for Black Ops or something like that, right? No, it's just, just to quickly go into it. So back in 2007, I put out a paper. I just uploaded it privately to my website, which had to do with my scalar physics research. And somehow someone found it on my server and reposted it on their website. Maybe like Google must have spidered it or something, and then they found it in a Google search. And then another guy found that paper and realized, wow, this is the real deal, because he himself was also on a similar path as me in terms of very fringe level physics stuff. And so he formed a small company with an investor friend of his, and then they eventually asked me to join on as a consultant, to do some electronic testing for them and testing out their ideas. So I've got a 3D printer here thanks to them, because I was doing a lot of testing for them. And they named their company after the key principle in my paper. So it's weird that I ended up getting hired because of a paper I wrote and uploaded very quietly to my website many years earlier. So it's these weird like improbabilities that happened in my life, that helped me out in my research. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, very fascinating stuff. Thank you for sharing that. And as a layman, I don't know exactly what to make of it. For me, I think, I would be skeptical, but for the fact that they all were murdered. And then that piques my interest a lot more, And I found that many times actually just researching. I'll go on these certain tracks of knowledge, and then I'll find like all of the people talking about a specific niche topic are all dead. And then I kind of know I'm onto something there. So I feel like free energy, it's the same, but as well, I think there's an obfuscation of the nature of reality in there, right? I do feel like they're holding back the dam of this new scientific worldview or model that would enable the rapid advancement of these types of technologies, but then would basically put an end to our current knowledge or worldview of reality. What do you think about that? That's just been my general conclusion.
Right. Yeah. So the question is, why hasn't free energy been released sooner? What are the reasons for that? What are the impacts if you were to release it? And there are both, I would say, malevolent and benevolent reasons why free energy has not been released yet. So I would say that both sides, if you want to think of it in terms of good and evil or light and dark, there's things that both of them agree on. And one of those things is free energy, don't release it yet. Yeah. Okay, now there's reasons for it. Obviously, the oil cartels, the military industrial complex, our entire economy depends. It runs on oil, essentially. Oil, natural gas, nuclear power, and so on. And those are all like, those probably add up to multiple trillions of dollars worth of industry and people's lives hinging on those industries staying as they are, So if free energy comes along, you're going to wreck all that. You're going to make the price of oil crash. And there are currencies that are essentially linked to oil. There's so many different things that are tied into it that the second and third order effects of releasing it would have devastating effects on not only the economy, but also geopolitics, on society, and everything that spirals out of that. So, of course, there are vested interests that want to preserve their own profit, their own exploitation of our lives. The reason why rent is so high, why food is so high, why you have to pay for gas and so on is because free energy is being suppressed. But if free energy were released, you would probably lose your home. You would probably lose your car. there would be no gasoline for you anyway because the investors pull out of that stuff and then they can't fund. I mean, the entire thing breaks down because our society, our economy is based on debt. It's based on promises and contracts and future speculation. And that is the stuff that goes poof when something new comes along that totally wrecks the fundamental assumptions about how things work. You know what I mean? So there's a massive destabilization that happens that not only does it affect the bad guys, so to speak, the corporate fat cats who get rich off of us, but it also affects all of us that depend on the system for our livelihood and for getting the food delivered on time and to keep the lights on. So yeah, free energy can end up liberating us, but there's this adjustment period between releasing it and it becoming fully normalized and implemented. There's this, like, I don't know what the gap would be, like 10, 20, maybe even 30 years, where you would have absolute chaos. It's like dominoes knocking down dominoes one after the other, and you're one of those dominoes, so the light's going to go off, and you could have potential World War III over just the instability that results from it. So, but if that is what we need ultimately to secure the freedom of mankind, maybe it's worth it. Maybe it's worth it, but you better be prepared. You can't advocate for free energy without also being a prepper, because if you're not, then you don't fully get it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think you only scratched the surface of the chaos that would ensue should free energy go forward. And then also, I think we talked about it in the last stream where also to not discount the war element, right? Unlimited energy means unlimited food, desalinization, abundance, but also means infinite weaponry, right? You can, right? So it's, are we ready for it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could have, for example, drones that fly 24/7. They never run out of energy, and they have energy weapons on them, like let's say giant laser beams or something, and they don't require much energy to build. Maybe they could even be self-replicating. So you could quickly enter a Terminator or Matrix scenario where you have basically self-replicating machines that run on free energy that keep things on total lockdown, and there's really nothing you can do. You know what I mean? So in order to really have free energy, you would, as much as I hate to say it, you would have to have a global governing body to regulate it, to ensure that that no single dictator here or there or some terrorist here or there could use it to basically blow up the planet or take over the planet or something like that. Now, of course, there are totalitarian, negative, hostile governments, but it's also possible to have a just global republic, I guess you could say, where there is democracy. There is a system of law and order and justice and freedoms, like in the Bill of Rights, for example. You could implement that globally, and with enough accountability, with enough, I don't want to say surveillance, but in a degree it would be, you could preserve freedom to a large degree while also keeping down the danger of things like artificial general intelligence and free energy being used in a weaponized manner. But humanity is currently not in a state to be that cohesive globally. So I don't think that's going to happen for quite a while. And therefore, if free energy does get out, it'll probably be catastrophic. So it'll rip apart civilization as we know it. But then it would start being used more in a local, like imagine like medieval villages with a free energy unit powering them locally, like in small little clusters with a much reduced population. That's probably where it would go, if it went down that road.
I've heard a few rumors of several communities that have done just that in Switzerland and other places where they have basically said, leave us alone. We have our own free energy system. Humans aren't ready for it yet. I've heard that, and I hear a lot of people claiming that these devices, like Stephen Greer, I think 6, 8, maybe it's 10 years ago now, said, "Oh, we have these units on the shelf ready to go." What do you make of that? Have you looked into that? Do you think that it could be true?
Right. Yeah. That's the reason why I bring it up, because it's already being done in a small micro case sense. So what you're talking about is the Maternitha, or however you pronounce it, Maternitha, something like that, community in Switzerland. Some people call it a cult, but it's basically it's a commune. It's like a communal village where the founder of it, he invented a free energy device. It's based on the electrostatic Wimshurst machine, except for it's got magnets and some capacitors and stuff in it. And it generates like many, many kilowatts of free energy. And he's been building these for many decades, and he won't reveal his secret to the world, of course. But that's what they use to power their village, and they're happy there. They're happy with that. And of course, he says that while he was in jail for something, he got a divine revelation. He was shown the schematics to this device, and maybe that's true. But people who looked into that device, they found that it was actually based on the works of some other guy whose name I forgot. I could look it up, but some guy from I think the 1930s or 1940s who figured out how to harvest electricity from the atmosphere. So it was an improvement on that. So I think the guy kind of figured that out and then created like a god complex kind of thing to pull a cult together and to build a religion around it, which I think might be probably what you'll see in the future if humanity ever descends into a dark age. You'll see these religious-based cults springing up because religion is a very good way of keeping people together with a common culture and with a certain moral code. So it's a way to build cohesion. You can't just have you can't really have a community of atheists because a lot of times they're based on logic. Logic is what keeps them together. But then people start getting illogical sometimes, or more people join, or they have kids or something that aren't that logic based, so it ends up falling apart. So you have to have something that operates at a deeper level of human consciousness than just pure rational logic. You need something emotional, something more value based, more mythical and ideological. So that's what they have going on there in Switzerland, and probably what we'll see in the future. So yeah.
Yeah, I gotta check them out. I got family in Switzerland, so maybe I'll send some probes out there, see if we can get some data. But yeah, I think you touched on a very interesting point with respect to religion, and it seems now we are in some pretty interesting times since we last talked. World War III is looking spicier and spicier. They're definitely gearing up. We got Trump. I'd love to get your takes on that, but as well, just on the topic of religion, there does seem to be this resurgence of Christianity, Orthodox religions, stuff like that, which I think is great to an extent. As you said, like, you and I have very similar views on religion, I would say. I think it's great that they do seem to be this resistance to, a lot of the insanity, the woke nonsense, but then also it's already starting to feel like it's getting a little culty and kind of us versus them, kind of like the Crusade 2.0. Most of it's just like meme culture right now, but it seems like it's gearing up to be a I don't know, a little spicy kind of holy war online. Are you seeing that too? And yeah, what do you make of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a polarization of society that's been happening for decades, but it's definitely been accelerating in more recent years. And I don't really blame Christians at all for being that way, because they've been pushed into it by a lot of the aggressive wokeness that, the top of the hierarchy has been pushing upon the people at large. So there is an agenda going on to polarize the population, to divide them in every single way possible in order to make to make the West weaker and weaker. Because you don't really see that happening within, let's say, Russia or China or North Korea or a lot of those BRICS nations necessarily. Well, I mean, I guess lately in Venezuela, you've got the political tensions there over the election there, So yeah, you do have that there. But I'm just saying that America is incredibly divided along ethnic, ideological, religious lines. And it's not an accident, of course. So the more one side polarizes, the more the other side kind of reacts to that by also polarizing, or, we would call it radicalizing. And I'm not making a judgment on whether radicalization is good or bad, because I think sometimes it is necessary to defend what you stand for. Like, for example, if you are incredibly radically constitutionalist, that's not a bad thing. That is a very good thing. That's a necessary thing, because that's what you need in order to offset the threats of socialism, Marxism, communism, and this new Great Reset, technocratic, whatever ism that is. To counter that, you do have to kind of band together and become more committed to your principles, because it's exactly this milquetoast, weak, lukewarm attitude that the right has had over the past several decades that has allowed these things to flourish. It's almost like an immune system that has gotten so weak that cancer and parasites and viruses, they start proliferating because the immune system simply didn't have it together and wasn't watching these threats. So I think it's all about the direction of the radicalization, what it stands for and what it's fighting for. That kind of determines whether it's a good thing or not.
Yeah, very, very well said. Definitely is a pendulum, which either way does seem to be a mass loosening event. And I want to get into
Mhm.
this concept of loosh and energy harvesting. But yeah, I'd just love to quickly get your take on the whole Trump assassination. For me, I have to be honest. I'm very skeptical. Of what happened. When I see his ear, it looks like it wasn't grazed to me. And others are Republicans are freaking out by even saying that. Like I talk to
Yeah.
military guys who say like the odds of it bleeding like that and not having like an actual flesh wound that you can observe in depth a week later is the odds are so rare. And then there's also, based off this Trump stuff, there's almost this proliferation of him being like a messiah type, saved by God, here to
Mhm.
save the world. I think is fueling this kind of religious extremism as well. So I'd just love to get your take, general thoughts on the assassination. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just like come right out and say it that I do think that it was a dark state sting operation on the deep state. The dark state sting
Okay.
operation on the deep state. So I'm making a differentiation there between one thing called the dark state and another thing called the deep state. And I'll get into that in a moment, right?
Yeah.
But going back to the details of it, see, the devil is all in the details, and the details are super important because when you're trying to determine what went on during this event, if you accept a detail that isn't true and you base everything else on it, then all your conclusions are going to be kind of screwed up by that, right? So I've tried to reserve my judgments on it until all the details are clear, and more details are coming out, So for example, I'll give you an example. When I first saw it for the exact first time, I was thinking, oh shoot, was it staged in some way, like a blood packet or just some sort of
Mm.
staged phony, special effects kind of thing. And so I didn't make that conclusion right away, but I said, what if? And then I started looking for signs whether that was the case or not.
Mhm.
Well, so someone posted a photo where they pointed at Trump's hand after he pulled it down from his ear, and they said, oh, look, there's no blood on it. There's no blood anywhere. But it was a very fuzzy photo. So
Mm.
then I found the original photo, and when you look, yeah, you can see like blood like here, 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 and here. Okay, it wasn't like all over there. It was like right there because it was only like a split second after you touched it. Okay, so that's point number one. There was supposedly blood there if the photo is legit. The next thing is he himself remarked within a day or two that he was surprised. Well, he says he was surprised by how much blood there was. And he claims that the medical doctors told him that the ear is actually one of the most blood flow rich regions of the body. And I looked that up, and that is true. Okay,
Mm.
so all right, maybe that's the case. Um, and then when he was down on the ground, his face was off to the side. And so the blood pattern, if it was real blood, it was flowing in the correct direction as well, in the correct angle
Okay.
based on that. Okay, so that part checks out too. And then of course after that he had the bandages on, so you can't tell what went on. Not until I looked at the date. It was 2 weeks later that he meeting with Netanyahu had the bandage off, and there's AP photos of his ear where it looked like it was pretty good. Like there's nothing wrong with it. Now I did find the original photo. I did zoom in on it more to look at the ear, and you can see something, but it's hard to tell whether that is how his ear always was or if that is where the plastic surgery was. Now, I did look up, for example, healing times for getting stitches or major cuts, how long that takes to heal. And it takes about, let's say, 10 days for the scab to fall off and another 3 days for the red, pink start to, lighten a little bit more. So it is within that plausible time frame where, yeah, you know what, if he had gotten plastic surgery that same day when he was in the hospital after the event, if they had like sewed it up or, put some sort of thing on it, then in about 2 weeks, that is right around the time you would expect where there would only be like a little bit of pink there. So, I mean, it's not like his entire ear got ripped off or like a major chunk is missing. It seems more like it's split. It's almost like if you took a scissor and you cut literal side of your ear like that. So that's what the injury was if you were to consider this all plausible. Now,
Mm.
if it was staged, then those things also seem to fit. I mean, that would mean that he would have had to have had like a blood packet behind his ear that could have been remotely electronically triggered or something like that. So therefore, there would be a little bit of blood on his hand, and then there'll be more blood squeezed on when he was down on the ground. You see, so far the data doesn't 100% prove either possibility. However, it doesn't rule out either possibility either. You know what I mean? So it's almost like we're in this weird quantum state where people can believe whatever they want, and there's evidence to support it, right? So that's why I'm waiting for more data to come out that kind of like nails it, like proves it 100% which way it is. So in terms of like what that is, that's what I think it is. Now, as far as like the bigger agenda, I mean, obviously, I think everyone knows that it was either staged or it was an inside job. I mean, there's really no two other opinions on it because so much of it does not add up, right? I mean, the shooter was known hours prior to the event. It's kind of like skulking about and using the rangefinder and being stopped from even entering, and then being seen near the building, and then he disappeared. Now he's on the roof. People were pointing it out, and the cops were supposed to be on that roof, but they said it was too hot, so they were not on there, which is baloney because there was another building right behind Trump where the Secret Service snipers were, or the police snipers were on that roof, and it's not like that roof is any cooler than the other one. So that excuse doesn't fly. And there's so many other lies that the Secret Service has been caught on. And even the local police were calling out the Secret Service for lying, for trying to shirk the blame and blame the local police when it was actually them who, screwed up in a major way, or screwed up by not killing Trump. Maybe that was the true intent. So I'm just saying that if you look at all the data, I think I'm leaning 80% that it was a real shooting, because people did, in the bleachers especially, one guy died and two people got injured, and those seem pretty real. And you could see how the bullet hit the railing behind one of those people, and it also bounced off, or another one hit the hydraulic line on the crane, on the little forklift or whatever, and you could see the hydraulic fluid shooting out. So unless that was staged as well, which I find increasingly implausible, I would rather lean towards it being actual real bullets. Now, it could have been multiple shooters, because typically, I mean, that particular shooter, he was only 130 to 150 yards away, and using, he was using iron sights and possibly a red dot. And at that range, to do a headshot, you have to be, I mean, you can do it, but you got to have some skill to do it, because it's I mean, the head is about
2 MOE. 2 MOA. Yeah.
Right. So the head is about 8 inches by right around 6 inches. I mean, that's a classic head box. So to do that at 150 yards, it's between 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 max MOA.
Yeah.
And if you had some magnification, you could do that easily. But if you're under stress and you're on a roof, like kind of sloped like that, and you're this kid who got kicked out of his rifle club for being such a bad shot, I mean, come on, it seems like he was more like a patsy, and there was probably a sniper with a silencer who took the real shots. But anyway, the data is still coming out, and we'll just have to see. Yeah. So if you want me to talk briefly about the deep state versus dark state stuff, I can kind of touch on that if you like.
Sure. Yeah. I just first wanted to address what you said.
Sure.
I think what you're saying is exactly how I feel as well. I don't think it's a slam dunk either way. I'm actually, just from talking about this, I got people on all the different channels. Got Tina Marie here. She's been great support. She says, no way the ear injury is fake, and she's an MD apparently. So there we go. Some other guys posting stuff, whatever. But yeah, that's the more frustrating thing with a lot of these things. As you said, it's almost like this quantum state where it's not definitive for me. If the ear was like torn and a piece missing, which you would expect from a grazing, it would be open and shut case for me. But what you're saying as well is also plausible. It's plausible that it could have just nicked it so fine, and even though it's healed a week later, maybe whatever. And that seems to be the case with a lot of these massive events, right? There's like different layers of theories. It's not always clear cut, and maybe that's by design. I don't know. Like for example with the global lame-demic the last few years, right? It's like, it was a wet market. No, it was a bat. No, it was Fauci. No, it doesn't exist at all, right? And same with this Trump stuff, right? It's like, no, the Secret Service is in on it, but maybe Trump's in on it too. Maybe it didn't happen. Maybe it did happen, and chaos happens. There's unstable people who do crazy stuff every day, right? But then also the likelihood of these people being able to get into that position is incredible. So yeah, it seems to be the nature of a lot of these events where, at least for me, it's just not a slam dunk either way, and it's frustrating. But
yeah, I mean, we can assign probabilities right up until the point where something becomes definitive, but anything that isn't either scientific or acknowledged massively in the mainstream as being the truth, there's always going to be a margin of uncertainty that people are going to fight over and are going to be split over. So whether it's 9/11 or JFK or Bigfoot or Elvis or whatever, people get divided along these lines because it simply isn't clear. And this is just one of the latest ones. And I think there'll be more to come in the future that people will be divided over. And unfortunately, that's the way things are. There's more division than there is unity because,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, and the real reason it's because people are being divided along basically intelligence and information levels, like the access to information. Not everyone has the same access to information. Maybe one person only has 10 minutes a day to read the news, and another one has 2 hours to deep dive on things, right? So they're going to be at very different levels of what data they have. And then emotion gets into it and bias, and one person will accept some poison pill that the media puts out, and another one will not, right? So they're going to start diverging more and more and more in their viewpoints, whether it's about Trump or what happened during this assassination or whatever, in this assassination attempt or whatever. So people are getting increasingly divided, and it's probably by design, I would say,
Yeah.
both politically, like a political conspiracy, but also maybe even in a higher spiritual sense.
Hmm. Very interesting. Yeah, well, I want to dive into that, and I think ultimately the frustrating thing is, especially with AI, everything can be faked. Like the Trump event
Mm-hmm.
could have been totally staged, right? They have the technology, they have the ability, they have the actors and such to do that, right? And it could have been 100% true, right? And it's hard to know for sure, and I think that's part of the game with these events is to polarize, and I think it's part of the deep state slash dark state agenda as well, is the divide and rule conquer. So maybe we can transition into that in terms of you distinguish the two, the
Mm-hmm.
dark state and deep state, with respect to these kind of mass events. So yeah, walk us through your thinking there.
Okay, so over the past, well, ever since 2016, it became increasingly obvious with the way that Trump was targeted that there was a so-called deep state conspiracy against him or against American people in general. Like with, I mean, even going back to Edward Snowden and the NSA mass surveillance thing that got exposed. There's always been the security apparatus that has been mm, trying to use its tools against the people rather than against the enemy of the people. So they've become the enemy of the people, and they are unelected officials. They're unelected bureaucrats and intelligence agents and think tanks and so on. And that's what nowadays people have increasingly become aware of as being the deep state. So deep state has become a household word now when it used to be just a fringe conspiracy word, which speaks to another trend of fringe information becoming increasingly mainstream, which I'll talk about in a bit. So when we talk about the deep state, we're just talking about unelected bureaucrats. We're talking about the corrupt elements of our security apparatus, whether it's the FBI, the CIA, DHS, DOJ, DOE. I mean, name all these acronyms on and on and on. There's always going to be these subversive, anti-human, anti-American elements within them using those tools against the people themselves. You got that. You got the government think tanks. You've got different NGOs like Act Blue and the Sunrise Movement and a bunch of others. Vanguard, BlackRock, Blackstone, all those like super mega rich, sneaky, cunning, hostile groups that are very psychopathic in the way that they operate. They're all colluding as part of a syndicate to one degree or another, and they are the ones that stage false flag attacks and different shootings and man, I mean they're probably behind the you know jabs and such. So they're all part of that, and that's what we call the deep state. But see, they're still on the surface. There is another deeper layer where you start getting into, let's say, aerospace companies who have worked on UFO anti-gravity reverse engineering projects, right? You have deep underground military bases that are up to a mile underground, where the people that live down there, they're unrecognizable to us as even being Americans. They might as well be another planet, another race of humanoids down there, which being the way that they are. And a lot of that kind of stems back to the Manhattan Project, Philadelphia experiment, the Nazi scientists that were brought over after World War II. It's what Richard Dolan calls the breakaway civilization. So it's this breakaway parallel, technocratic, extremely sophisticated, almost alien-like human network that is interfaced with the alien component. That is what I call the dark state. And you might as well think of them as either aliens or like super advanced Nazis or like time travelers from the future, like centuries down the line, because that's where their technology level is at. And they've got the ability to not only see probable futures, but to manipulate things in a very sophisticated way, which is not quite on the level of aliens, but because they're not aliens, I mean, they're still mostly human. But I mean, they're the ones that are involved, for example, in military abductions, MILABs, where an abductee is not getting taken by aliens necessarily, but is being taken by human military personnel into underground military bases, and they're not being taken through vans or black helicopters. They're being taken through portals that open up in their bedroom and suck them through. So there's teleportation technology there, And I'm not getting into the stupid stuff about like the Solar Warden space fleet and like jump rooms that some of these LARPers like Corey Good and others have been talking about. I don't buy into that, because a lot of them have been proven to be LARPers, like live action role players, like hoaxers. Okay.
Yeah.
But in their fantasies of trying to read fringe material and kind of extrapolate from it and create this fantasy to get an audience wrapped around their finger, they accidentally stumble upon the real truth, accidentally without intending it, where they might be talking about imaginary technologies in their minds which approximate actual real things that are happening underground in this dark state. So what I'm saying is the dark state has an agenda that is more far-ranging and is more in line with the alien agenda than just the deep state, where the deep state's more like the corrupt street gangs on the surface, and the dark state is more like the CIA, giving them the guns and the drugs and manipulating them for their own secret political purposes. It's just like when the CIA goes into another country and starts recruiting tries to create an artificial uprising, like a color revolution or something like that. They utilize the ruffians over there, the street stragglers and the punks and such, to essentially create brown shirts like Hitler did to advance their political agenda. But those are just the surface level. So I do think that the Trump assassination attempt could have been possibly a dark state sting operation on the deep state in order to eventually build up the case that there, one, is a deep state, two, that they're responsible for so many of the problems that have been happening to the West over the past 20 years, if I'm going all the way back to JFK, if not the Federal Reserve, and to eventually expose pretty much all of that in order to justify a new order that is actually in line with the dark state agenda for a new kind of alien-run, technocratic, global, police state, surveillance state. So I think something like that could be on its way, but they're going to sacrifice the deep state to justify it. They're going to point to all those corrupt elements and say, we need more controls, more surveillance in order to make sure that they can never get back into power, to preserve freedom, to keep Americans safe, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I think that might eventually happen. Now, just kind of circle back to what we originally talked about. If they do succeed, in creating this global lockdown, almost like police state order under the guise of preserving freedom and justice and liberty and all that, then at that point you could have free energy and other advanced black ops technologies that are put out, because at that point things will be so locked down that there really is no way to be a maverick and try to use it against. I mean, if they have, for example, future viewing technology like pre-crime stuff from the Minority Report movie, if they have the ability to see what's going to happen, then they'll know if you're going to, let's say, use a free energy device to blow something up in a major way, to level a city, something like that. I mean, they would know in advance and they would probably come take you out. And I would actually argue that they are probably doing that already. And that is one of the reasons why free energy isn't out there, why inventors get killed, or why they start a project but they merely start forgetting about it, or maybe they lose their funding. There are many ways to prevent certain probable futures at the very moment of conception by just nudging one little thing. And as long as you have remote influencing abilities, whether it's psychic or technological, and remote or future viewing abilities, you can target those little points on the timeline to make sure that those things don't happen. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on underneath the surface. And what we see in the news with like the Trump attempt, everything else that's going on, those are probably just puppets on the stage being manipulated from behind according to some sort of a long-ranging script that isn't really obvious if you're not looking underneath the surface.
Yeah, I love the distinction, and I think it's fascinating. A question that comes to mind is more of an origin story about the dark state. I think we should really credit David Icke specifically, and others who he pulled from, for really outlining this kind of endless onion of the local government moving up to the UN, moving to the Council on Foreign Relations, these types of groups, all the way to these secret societies, and then even non-human, and so I wonder, do you think the dark state is merely a product of black ops gone awry, around the Truman era, where all this technology is being developed and there's no oversight. So they were able to do the, and they're using black funds and black monies to kind of be gods, and totally outside the realm of, any type of oversight. Or, are these people or entities, have an older story? Are these, bloodlines, or ultimately run by non-human forces that have been kind of manipulating humans for some time? Tom, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I do think it's a bit of both because if you look at ancient history and myths and so on, I mean, there were survivors of the Atlantean cataclysm. There were survivors of prior pole shifts, and not all of them lost their technology, right? So some of them retained their technology and they became as gods to the primitive survivors that were still on the surface, later on, maybe decades or centuries or so. And these cataclysms have happened throughout history. I mean, one of the major ones was right around 3200 BC. I don't know what it was called, but it was a major shakeup. And right around that time is where you got the start of the Mayan calendar, and various other calendars. I think the Jewish calendar goes back a little bit before that, but it was right around that time period where a lot of these calendars were started up, and it's because it was seen as a new age, almost like there had been a pole shift or some major flooding event, or some sort of asteroid or cometary bombardment, or all of those at the same time. But point being that even amongst the Mayans and various other legends, there have been gods or these advanced beings who came in on ships and taught them mathematics, geometry, agriculture, almost like restarting civilization using what knowledge and stuff they had stored up. And nowadays, the ones who would be doing that is not only aliens, but also these underground base cities, For example, in Turkey, right? In Turkey, they've got that ancient underground city called Derinkuyu, where up to between 10,000 and 30,000 people could have lived at one point. And they don't really know when that city was built, because it was built, but then it was also occupied over the next several thousand years by different people, so they don't know which one of those started it originally. But some estimates go back to 10 to 12,000 years ago, which would have put it back to the end of the last ice age, which some believe was also a pole shift event. Okay. So some of those advanced groups, they would have maintained their continuity of knowledge and technology over the ages, and they would have been essentially a parallel crypto-terrestrial civilization aside from the main humanity that advanced along the history that we're familiar with. Now, if you fast forward from that to, let's say, the 1500s, that's when you start getting groups like the Rosicrucians in the West, who had psychic abilities, they had alchemical technologies, and they had secret abilities and such. And I think they got their roots partially from the Templars, who were there centuries earlier, right? So there's all these secret groups that have always been there throughout history that have been apart from mainstream society. And so now if you go to the 1900s, to the Truman era, and a little bit before that, where they were, of course, building underground bases and cities and such, that whole element of it is very easy to corrupt. Because even though they use extremely high security measures, they're only human. And so if it's true about Truman and Eisenhower to a degree making deals with certain alien factions over other alien factions, siding with, let's say, the Greys and the Reptilians, or some of the more negative-oriented factions in exchange for technology, then that technology exchange would have acted as a Trojan horse to essentially allow these deep black ops groups to be infiltrated by the negative alien element and to start adopting their culture, their ways, their mindset, their abilities. And so that absorbed a lot of the military, the deep black military industrial complex into the alien agenda, right? So it's more like within the general population, the governments, their various projects, you get groups that become separated from them and become very advanced. And they then end up joining an already existing crypto-terrestrial civilization that has been there since the very beginning, right? So it's like a merging of tributary into the main river. That's what ends up happening. And so legends, for example, of the Nazis fleeing to not only South America, but also Antarctica, and then the Admiral Byrd expedition and so on. Well, that whole thing is probably the more advanced elements of the Nazis joining up with the crypto-terrestrials, which had already been on Earth for millennia, leading up to that point. So they became yet another tributary leading into that stream. And I mean, there's many other examples of it. For example, in Irish legend, you've got the, how do you pronounce it? The Tuatha De Danann people who end up joining with the Shi, who were these underground light beings, or hyperdimensional ultra-terrestrial alien beings that lived underground, they eventually had to leave the surface and join them underground. So even in Irish legends, there's examples of advanced human-like groups that end up joining with these even more advanced crypto-terrestrials underground. So that cycle happens over and over and over again. And so when you ask me, when did it start? I would say it started countless millennia ago, and along the way there have been various groups that have joined them, including more recently our own Deep Black military industrial complex.
Wow, that's incredible stuff. I find that very fascinating, and I'd be curious how because we have many different themes here. So I'm curious how, to see your worldview and how it all fits together, right? So we have alien abductions, right? Alien visitations. You are an experiencer and an abductee, I believe you would call yourself, right? We also have, the Christians kind of argument that aliens are really just demons and that we're really just in a fallen world, and it's just as simple as, we're in a world governed by Satan, the Dark Lord, whatever you want to call him. That's just that, right? There's, kind of good versus evil and chopping everything up that way. We have all these different people on the block doing things. You know what I mean? We got the underground, we got the breakaway society, we got demons and angels and entities. Do you think these are all somehow working in concert to, when we talk about this idea of the Loosh Farm or the Global Plantation or the Matrix, right? Are all these entities somehow working together as part of the Matrix? Where are you coming in at? Because it's hard to kind of make sense of where everything falls into place. So I'd love to get your kind of 1,000-foot view of the situation.
Yeah, and if you want a 1,000-foot view, you have to go all the way back to the beginning of creation itself and whatever we can speculate about it, okay? Because, it doesn't matter what religion you look at. Let's take Christianity, for example. So according to the Bible, in the beginning, there was darkness, there was the void. And then God said, let there be light. And then, everything was generated out of that. So a lot of these philosophical systems or religions, they start off with a void of nothingness, of infinite potentiality, but zero manifested actuality, okay? And something, God, the infinite creator, source, whatever you want to call it, projected into that the entire multiverse of all possibilities. So if we take that as a given, if we assume that was the case, then we also have to acknowledge that not only was there God, but there was also projections of God into individuated sentient beings endowed with free will. And that is what we are. Life is beings with some degree of free will, and free will increases to the degree that you are conscious and aware and informed. So obviously, like a little bacteria or something is going to have way less consciousness and way less free will than a human would. And in turn, we would have less consciousness and free will than some ultra-terrestrial being that is eons and eons more evolved than we are, okay? But the point is, once free will exists, once you have the ability to divide the infinite field of consciousness into just self and other, then arises the choice about whether you want to help and work in harmony with others, or whether you want to treat the other as an enemy or as a resource to exploit. And that starts building the very core, the very initial spark of evil. Because evil results from free will choosing to turn against the source, against creator, against the interests of others, and to work only for self, against others. So you can't really have free will without evil, and you can't have evil without free will. All right? So I think that's where the original schism was. During the act of creation, the very conditions that allowed for individuated beings with free will to exist gave rise to the potential for evil. And some beings decided to choose that because perhaps they had encounters with the physical world, with the rules and laws and limitations here, with competition and therefore predation and force and violence. And they started internalizing those rules into their spiritual makeup, and they started identifying with matter and its limitations. And so therefore they absorbed essentially the darkness into themselves, and they became agents of that darkness, agents of unknowing, of the void, of non-being. And so I think that's what evil ultimately is. It's a fragment of God, or a fragment of creation that has chosen of its own free will to adopt the ways and the nature of darkness, of the void, of non-being, and to act in its interests by basically undoing or feeding upon or exploiting greater creation. Right? So that was the original schism. And then since that time, you could have had many other different schisms or falls. For example, let's say that 80,000 years ago, there was a very advanced humanoid civilization, let's say on some other planet in the solar system or some other solar, star system entirely. And they were incredibly good and advanced, kind of like the Superman myth, where Superman's civilization that he came from, they were very advanced people with superpowers, or I mean, with very advanced technologies, but they had a schism within them. There was almost like a Lucifer rebellion, where part of them went against the main group. Maybe they developed too much of an ego, or too much hubris, or pride, or contempt, or whatever, and they split away, and there was a war, and then they were kicked out of that realm, and they came here to Earth. Okay. So in that case, you've got basically what we're talking about is we're talking about fallen angels, which the Book of Enoch talks about quite a bit. Mm-hmm. The idea of there having been a group of angels, and some of them rebelled, and some of them decided to come into physicality, into Earth, in order to breed with human women here and insert themselves into the karmic time stream that we have going on Earth, and they became part of it. And because of their influence, they ended up corrupting humanity at large, because they gave humans technology and magic and all this other stuff way before their time. So it's almost like Prometheus giving fire to humans and being punished for it. These fallen angels were punished for giving humans technology that humans weren't ready for yet. And because of that technology, they developed, violence and increasing means of war and corruption and debauchery and so on. And so therefore, the higher beings who kicked them out, they decided to go ahead and cleanse the earth of all this wickedness. And that's what Noah's flood supposedly was all about, according to that particular viewpoint. Anyway, so the reason why I bring that up is because that's yet another fall where you have these higher beings wanting to come here to mess with the existing ecosystem, which includes humans, and screw it up due to their influence. So that's like the Lucifer rebellion aspect of it. And then you can go even further where, for example, you've got the idea that reptilians or some other negative alien group, they came along and they genetically modified our ancestors. So our primate ancestors, the hominids, they were genetically modified to build a new model, which I guess would be Homo sapiens, or maybe one of our, just prior precursors, to be useful to them, right? Which ties into the whole Zechariah Sitchin Anunnaki stuff, where they modified humans to be a slave race, okay, something like that. And then the human soul matrix, which apparently existed in some other realm, they were tempted or lured into entering those bodies, and to therefore also enter into the karmic time stream of Earth and become part of the fate and the destiny of Earth. And so that's like a fall from a higher realm of human, where humans used to exist, down into this material plane, into these genetically modified bodies, which are lacking psychic abilities and are dumbed down in genetics or in IQ, and we've got a shorter lifespan than we should have, right? So we've been funneled down into these bodies that have been modified by hostile powers, offering some incentive for us coming here. Like maybe we thought that this would be a greater challenge. Maybe we like the idea of carnality, the whole sexual reproduction aspect of it or something, the family and the challenge and the drama that comes with it. Maybe that looked like, hey, that's a cool game. Let's go play that. So we got lured into these things, and here we are, sort of semi-trapped in this whirlpool of karma and illusion and making mistakes and thinking you have to make up for those mistakes. And, you kind of caught up in this whirlpool. So that's yet another fall, right? So we've got the initial schism at the very beginning of creation. You've got higher civilizations where they rebelled against one another, and maybe someone got kicked out and they came down here. And then you've got the human soul matrix being lured into here. And then to take it one step further, which is what I focus on in my Gnosis book, in there I talk about how advanced alien technologies have been misused throughout history for the gain of a particular group, but it ended up corrupting the timeline. It deviated things. It deviated the destiny of Earth away from where it should have been. And one example of that is the Ark of the Covenant. So what I talk about in my Gnosis book is how the Ark of the Covenant, that was just a box, okay? But inside the box was some sort of alien crystal, artificially intelligent occult technology that was contained therein. And this intelligence allowed the Israelites to essentially exist, to pillage their way north and to establish the kingdom of Israel, and to therefore lead to the entire timeline involving Jews and Israelites and eventually the Nazis and World War II, Holocaust, and blah, 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 which led to the military-industrial complex and deals with aliens. And here we are nowadays in 2024, and our world owes a lot of the way things are back in history to the Ark of the Covenant, because that is an intrusion from outside the Earth plane, outside the Earth sphere. It allowed a particular group within that sphere to do things that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to, right? So I get into that in my book, amongst many other things like alchemy and the Holy Grail, which is all part of the same technology. And I explain how alien technology has been misused to create the world that we exist in nowadays. And so there's a battle going on nowadays, which ties back into what I said earlier about the dark state and different alien agendas. There's a battle waging between those higher levels, involving either continuing to deviate the fate of Earth or to kind of steer it back into the way it originally was supposed to be. So there's forces of correction and balance and forces of exploitation and predation who want Earth to become even more hellish than it already is. But that's all happening under the surface. As I mentioned earlier, what we see in the news is only the surface puppet show of all that.
Wow. That very well said, very eloquent. So many tangents we want to go down. One, I want to talk to you about this soul trap theory, which you touched on. But another thing, I want to talk to you about, you mentioned Jewish calendars and Jewish timelines. As well, there's this, Saturn and the black cube seems to be a large part of this control structure. And so you've probably been seeing it on Twitter and such. There, more and more people are starting to kind of blame, Israel or Zionism or Judaism generally for kind of all of the problems in the world, and kind of pinning it, almost saying like all of the levers of control that they, in the world come back to kind of Zionists or, people of Jewish descent. As well, we see this concept of, like the Saturn, Saturn matrix and the black cube, which seems to be tied back to Judaism, which I've heard you speak about before. So, I want to get your take on that, because it does seem like there is this mass awakening to a lot of things that were hidden in that regard, but then also it seems like everyone's trying to like scapegoat Jews for everything, So I'd love to get your maybe thoughts on that first.
Yeah, so where do we start with the black cube? Well, okay, look, so obviously when Muslims go to Mecca to pray, they go to Kaaba, which is, well, it's a stone contained within a structure that's like a giant black cube. And so the Muslims, on their pilgrimage, they walk in a big circle around it. And it's amazing to watch like time-lapse video of them swirling around like a maelstrom around this black cube structure. I mean, how ominous and weird is that, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's pretty weird. And then you've got the Jews who, well, especially amongst the Orthodox Jews, one of their traditions is to have sections of the Torah written down on little parchments and stored inside of a black cube, which they strap to their forehead. Yeah. And as well on the arm with some straps. And so it's all symbolic, Yeah. So it's interesting that both of them have that symbolism of the black cube. And then you've got the black cube in other things as well. Like I think the throne, I could be wrong on this, but the throne of Osiris in Egypt was symbolized as a black cube as well. And maybe that's where the origin point was. But so clearly the black cube is a symbol for something, right? It's an occult symbol. And so recently I saw a video on X, on Twitter, of someone taking these black pyrite cubes. Well, I mean, they're like dark brass colored pyrite cubes out of like a cave wall, so they're like mining for minerals. And there were these perfectly shaped cubes of pyrite embedded in the walls. And the text that went along with that video was like, imagine if you're a caveman and you come across something like this and you see like straight lines for the first time in your life. Like, what would you think? And I found that post funny because I had been doing research for a long time on alchemy and the origins of alchemy. And I was able to trace it all the way back to caveman times, at least 40,000 years ago, during the Le Champ magnetic excursion event, when the sun just went haywire and humans had to retreat into caves in order to survive. Okay, so they spent like generations in these caves, like at least 300 years. That's how long this thing lasted, where there's like intense radiation and lightning strikes and like ultraviolet radiation that would burn your skin. So 40,000 years ago, there was a big mass disaster and humans had to move into these caves. And because they moved into caves, they would also have had access to different cave minerals, including pyrite and other things which they used to strike fires with. So pyrite, that's why it's called pyrite, because PYR is a Greek word for fire. Okay, it's like has to do with fire. So It's a fire stone. That's what pyrite means. And pyrite is a very important core element in alchemy. It is one of the raw materials that is used to eventually produce the Philosopher's Stone. So these cavemen back then, over generations, they probably would have discovered that their fire-starting materials were decomposing due to the humidity and the water and the air and so on. And when it decomposes into other key elements that are used in alchemy, right? So I think that was the beginnings of alchemy, and eventually, maybe through divine revelation or who knows what, they might have stumbled upon the correct way of making the Philosopher's Stone. And once they did, and once they imbibed it, they would have been endowed with psychic powers, with enhanced life. They would have lived multiple centuries. They would have become superhuman, essentially, okay? And with that, they would have had the ability to study the stars over a very long period of time, learned astronomy, learned, therefore, how to navigate the entire Earth, because you have to know the stars in order to navigate around the globe. So they would have become ancient mariners, settling in the entire globe. And this would have been, thousands and thousands of years ago. And so, therefore, they would have been one of the original crypto-terrestrial breakaway civilizations that would have gone eventually underground or off-world or something like that, using the knowledge and technology that they gained, potentially by originally having discovered alchemy in the caves, okay? So the reason why I bring that up is because they would have formed essentially a secret society of semi-immortals who had vast knowledge and abilities to see through time and to therefore engineer civilization according to that knowledge, okay? And if one of the things that made them be that way was pyrite, well, there you got this dark cube, which might have been one of the symbols of their originating technology points. So that's a potential hypothesis I've been pondering and looking into as one reason for it. But the black cube in itself, so typically cubes are representative of 3 dimensions. So the matrix, so the matrix that we're in, this construct of space-time, typically it's symbolized as a square or as a cube, because the cube is one of the most stable structures. It's like it's a building block, right? Mm-hmm. So when you think about matter, the building blocks of existence, the cube is symbolic of it. And then black symbolizes potentiality, the void, okay? Which kind of ties back to what I said earlier about evil originating from the void, or originating from consciousness identifying with the void. So black cube, in a way, is very symbolic of this material control system that we are within, sort of a reality construct that has been deviated in a direction that benefits certain predatory forces that are aligned with the forces of the void. Mm-hmm. So I think that the black cube is representative of that. It represents the matrix. And so therefore, when we talk about the black cube of Saturn, well, so Saturn, that's a whole subject in itself, because Saturn it represents time, So the rings around it, it's a natural coincidence, or maybe some hyperdimensional symbolic, intentional symbolism, that the rings around it kind of symbolize this time loop, or this time stream that we are within, that it's almost like the temporal component of which the cube is merely the 3D spatial aspect, right? Because we exist within 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. So the 3 dimensions of space is the black cube, and Saturn kind of represents the time that binds that as well. Because you can't really represent time on a geometric object necessarily, like a cube, right? So it's representative of that. And even within Greek myths, for example, you've got Cronus eating his sons. And there's that famous painting by Francis de Goya, something like that, where you've got this ghastly looking god eating like a child, like ripping its real limbs off. Well, that is symbolic of the thing that generates time eating the offsprings of it, like basically absorbing it into itself. So in other words, the time loop, the space-time structure, the matrix, absorbing the higher human soul matrix into its karmic time stream, as I mentioned earlier. So I do think that that's what the black cube of Saturn represents. And a lot of these secret societies, these breakaway civilizations, they are engineering human civilization almost as if it were an alchemical project. So taking it from like base matter to separating it out, maybe like burning off one part, keeping the best part of it, using it as a seed for the next stage, then iterating on this process, refining it each time in this alchemical process to try to create the human equivalent or human civilizational equivalent of the Philosopher's Stone, which is essentially a humanity that is broken out of the matrix, that has higher divine abilities, that is supernatural, that has overcome space and linear time. So it's overcome the black cube and it's overcome Saturn. So it's kind of like left that whole control system. That's what I think some of these positive secret societies are really working towards. And so, we're looking at alchemy at multiple levels of interpretation, both like psychological, spiritual, civilizational, like planetary, and also in the original sense, just mere like caveman alchemy, where they were able to endow themselves with psychic powers and extremely long life. So that is super complicated and complex. I mean, I'm surprised I was able to map it out, but there you go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Like I've heard it explained that much of our financial system, and legal system, is in many religions are actually a form of Saturn worship. And then, of course, as well, we have the storm of Saturn, which is a hexagon, which could be basically the cube,
Right.
and then yeah, also people have outlined Saturn is putting off these weird waves that you can actually hear, sound waves, and people have suggested that it is a form of, it's kind of like the transmission to keep people in the matrix as well. And then also there's the book, I forget that guy's name, he's like ring makers of Saturn. I've listened to several of his talks,
Hmm.
and he claims, kind of as a side, that there's these entities like massive ships that are like bigger than the earth that are making the waves, and it's part of, I don't know, the matrix system. I don't know. It's pretty out there, but I was just
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
yeah, and for all I know, the black cube symbolism also ties into some spaceship or space station that's out in that region somewhere. You know, like maybe reality is fractal, and you've got the same symbol appearing at multiple levels of scale, whether it's pyrite to alchemy to Saturn to some alien superstructure. You know what I mean? Like it could. I mean, isn't it funny that in Star Trek the Borg travel in a giant black cube,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
To assimilate worlds. I mean, come on. I think that's some fractal self similarity there across different levels of scale.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and kind of on the same vein of topic, I've been going more and more down this whole soul trap theory, and I've been getting hate. I got haters now because I don't think the entire world is purely a hell realm prison planet. I had people even get mad at me for having kids and said that I should be in jail because I'm having a child.
Mm.
Whatever. But anyways, the general theory, which I know you're aware of, is this concept of the soul trap, right? So many different areas of knowledge, whether it be near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences or pre-life or post-life regression and hypnosis, are kind of painting the picture that we are to an extent tricked to come back here again and again by kind of higher level entities that are essentially looshing us, stealing our energy and thought forms. And so for me, I think this is definitely a real phenomena that is occurring. I think the conclusions is where I get a little skeptical of. Like I've been getting a lot of hate from people who think like even the idea of trying to live a good life and a trying to up your vibe or get into manifestation or there seems like their only goal is to just escape this realm that they're in, right? And I think that's very dangerous. So yeah, I'd love to hear your take on this concept of the soul trap, and then what do we do with these conclusions? Because I think a lot of people are like spiraling with this information and going down some pretty dark paths. So
Hmm.
yeah.
So it used to be the case where people didn't believe Jack. They didn't believe a lot of things. And the challenge of people like me, for example, and others in the fringe authorship field was trying to wake them up, trying to say like, hey, your normie reality is false. Go look at all the stuff that's outside the mainstream mundane reality. Well, that used to be the case. Nowadays, we've got another issue where people are awakening, but they're spiraling off into outer space, essentially, where they're kind of going, I mean, they're going a little bit nuts with the awakening process and going in a direction that isn't necessarily on mark. And one example being to disenfranchise a small segment of your audience right now, one part of it could be the flat earth and Tartaria stuff, which I think is an example of going off the mark. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that the white light soul trap idea, the more extremes versions of that are also in the same vein. Now, I don't dismiss those things because I don't dismiss them on the basis of, oh, it just sounds crazy, so therefore, like, I dismiss it. No,
Yeah.
I dismiss it because I'm aware of what their reasoning is, what their logic is, what they base it on, and I'm aware of other things that they're not aware, and I can see how a lot of it is wrong or how it's based on logical fallacies or poisoned poison data pills that they've accepted and built everything else upon, you know? So there's sometimes there's poor logic, there's emotional thinking, you know, like historical thinking, and then there's just like, you know, incomplete data. I think incomplete data is probably the number one reason why a lot of people spiral off. Is because they've researched a lot about a particular very, very narrow field, but they haven't broadened enough in order to tap into data from other fields that would deny or validate, you know, what they are, the directions that they're going down. Okay, so for example, with flat Earth, okay, just to quickly cover that, if you don't have enough knowledge of atmospherics, optics, physics, you know, science, just basic, you know, Newtonian mechanics, then or geometry, then you're not going to have the enough data points that you need in order to invalidate these sleights of hand that you're being shown in flat Earth proofs. So you're going to look at something, it's going to make sense to you, you're going to think it's absolute proof, and then guess what? Now it's become emotionally locked into you, and you're not going to therefore even open your eyes to the other data that might show that that was false to begin with. So it just kind of builds upon itself, and then you start linking your identity to it, and then now you call everyone a globetard. You know what I mean? You start going down that road, and then it becomes tribalism. It becomes tribalism and ego identification, and now it's locked in beneath the level of rationality, and so therefore nothing anyone can say will shake you out of it. And it's really no different from being in a cult, because when you're in a cult and you're brainwashed, then all of a sudden anyone that's trying to wake you up out of that, you see them as the enemy, and then you kind of reject automatically by default everything that they say. So it's ironic that people who want to, you know, escape the illusion and escape the matrix, they're boxing themselves sometimes into cult mentality and using poor thinking and poor judgment to, you know, essentially build a mental prison around themselves that locks out all evidence to the contrary, right? So, all right, so that said, okay, getting back to the white light topic, I acknowledge that there is a component of truth to it. There is deception in the afterlife. You know, there are things that can go wrong with the reincarnation process. But I do think that the fallacy is in saying that the entire mechanism is 100% a trap and there's nothing redeeming about it, okay? And the reason why I say that is because let's take universities as an example, okay? There are scam universities out there that you pay a lot of money for, you get a degree, but you find out that it wasn't even a real university. So you just paid a bunch of money and you got a degree that you can't even use because it's not even a real thing, okay? It's a scam university. So someone could say, okay, well, based on that, therefore, universities are all scams, and there's really no reason to ever go to a college, ever. But that's not true, because colleges originally, they were founded with good intentions. You know, there are actual good people in there trying to build the next generation of scientists and doctors and lawyers or whatever, and, you know, that are needed, okay? So you can have something that is either neutral or originally good, where a part of it gets hijacked or deviated in the wrong direction, or people just play their cards wrong and they make bad choices and they suffer the consequences for it. But then what? I mean, are you going to blame the system for that? Or is the system doing exactly as it's meant to and giving you the correction that you need to kind of not make those mistakes once again? So I'll give you an example on that. So when we talk about, for example, the amnesia component, you know, I mean, people are born and we don't necessarily remember our past lives. We don't necessarily remember who we actually truly are. It's like we're kind of like knocked in the head, you know, metaphorically speaking, and we lose our memories, and then we wind up in this maze, just like the Maze Runner movie. And so we wind up here, and what, you know, people say, well, then how are we supposed to progress in life or get anything out of it if we can't even remember what we did wrong in a previous life in order to correct it? You know, like, what's the point of having our memories erased if it erases everything that we gained in a previous life? That's what they say is one reason why reincarnation is a trap and why amnesia is part of that trap. Well, see, you're looking at it with a 2x magnifying lens when you should be using a microscope that goes down to 100x. Because when you zoom in on that issue and you do your research, you realize that, number one, there are a lot of kids who are reported in the literature who do remember their past lives. And they've got other things like scars and markings on their body that corroborate with it. So when you check it with the historical data of who they claim they used to be, yeah, sure enough, that person got shot in that exact spot or something like that. You know, there's continuity between one life and the next. But even if you discount that, you should also realize, just looking at your own life, what you're into, who you are as a person, that you came into this life not as a blank slate, but as a being that already has been loaded up with subconscious wisdom and, you know, predispositions, talents, biases, right? You already come into life with a storehouse of inner spiritual talents that kind of they kind of well up out of you at key moments in life. Like when you're confronted with a particular decision, or you realize that something is morally wrong. You don't when you realize that something is wrong, it's not that you remember the previous life that you've had where you did it and you got punished for it. No, like now it's become integrated into your very being. It's become part of your spiritual DNA, where just deep down that that's wrong, right? So some people that we call old souls, or maybe you're an old soul, or some of you listening are old souls, you'll realize that you didn't make a lot of the same mistakes that other people have made in life because you had an innate sense or knowing to not do that, right? Well, where did that come from? Obviously, you were not born as a blank slate. You came here with something. And that something comes from the higher part of your psyche, okay? It's like your cloud data backup. So a part of that entire thing is like right here on your local hard drive, but there's another extension through your spiritual internet connection that goes up to the cloud, and that's where the rest of your memories and being and talents and your soul destiny, everything like your higher consciousness, that's where that is. And sometimes that stuff kind of comes down into you through your subconscious and wells up during these key points in life. And that is proof that we don't get our memories completely wiped. We only get wiped of the superficial junk, I guess, that we might otherwise cheat with if we had knowledge of it during these integrity tests or challenges or lessons that we have in this life. So it kind of keeps us honest. It kind of keeps us pure. However, because we do have amnesia, if you don't have a very clear, strong connection to this cloud backup, to your innate sense of intuitive knowing, then you will be easily confused in life, and you could then easily be led astray in life and repeat the same mistakes over and over and over until you finally get it. So there's a lot of suffering that happens on Earth right now due to amnesia, but it's more of a side effect or a risk of the general amnesia process, which I think is either neutral or ultimately beneficial in the sense that anesthesia is beneficial for surgery, and that it serves a certain function. Okay, it serves a certain function. Because as I like to joke, imagine if you're 80 years old and you're crotchety and you tell everyone to get off your lawn, you die, you come back as a baby, and you still have that same mindset. So now as a toddler, you're telling everyone to get off your lawn, and you just hate everyone because you're just sick of this, you're sick of all of this. So imagine if you had that corrupt pattern with you still in this life. Like you wouldn't be able to do your own thing in this life. You wouldn't have necessarily a fresh start to build upon the more worthwhile things. You know what I mean? So those are some rationalizations for it, or some ideas for it. I'm not saying that that's the only thing that's going on. I'm just saying that if you're going to tackle the soul death, the white light trap stuff, you have to look at the big picture and research not just the modern stuff like Howdy Mikowski and Ed Dames, who was one of the originals who talked about the white light trap. Not them, but go back in time to Rudolf Steiner, the Theosophists, the Rosicrucians, the ancient Egyptians, the Tibetans, the Greeks, Plutarch, for example. Get into those people and tap into that ancient wisdom and try to compare the modern stuff to that, and then make your judgment. Like, don't just watch freaking BitChute videos and like base your entire like destiny on that,
Tom, how dare you? How dare you give a more nuanced approach than the BitChute Soul Trap Doomers? Guys, you heard it here. He's clearly disinfo, talking about the world not being flat and giving hope for the world. I'm getting hate in the comments here, but no, I honestly couldn't have said it better, Tom. That's exactly when I hear the soul trap stuff. Like for me, I grew up in a place where I was totally different than everybody around me. I was totally different than my family, who had more or less the same upbringing, like my siblings. I was totally different than most people I went to school with. I had this feeling at a young age that my house wasn't here on planet Earth, right? And so I think we are born with this kind of innate understanding that is part of our deeper soul or deeper essence, right? Having said that, though, it's a very nuanced conversation because, the New Agers say, all of this is love and light and there's no evil, there's no manipulation, there's no bad stuff. When, if you dig into a lot of this soul trap white light, there clearly is some type of, sociopathic level of manipulation. For me, I think it ultimately comes down to us having to become sovereign ourselves, that we are ultimately sovereign beings and that we have forgotten that, either by trickery or deception or manipulation or through evil, but ultimately Either we are literally just passive vessels, that are food for entities with no free will, or we are ultimately sovereign beings with immense power. And so it's kind of a choose your adventure. And I believe that we are sovereign beings who have forgotten our true power. But yeah.
Yeah, well said. I mean, yeah, completely. Because, I mean, seriously, like, what is more likely, that something is only ever one thing, or that it's a mix of things? I mean, just looking at it probabilistically, it's always going to be a mix of things. There's always going to be exceptions, little nuances, right? And it doesn't matter. Like, for example, are Americans good or bad? I mean, are they good or evil? Well, not all one or the other, right? It's a mix. Are aliens good or evil? It's not all one or the other. It's actually a mix. You can point that, I mean, animals, insects, plants, elements, some elements are good for you, like iron and zinc and so on, and other ones are poison, like arsenic. So it doesn't matter where you look, there's duality, there's dualism. Mm-hmm. Even going back to the very beginning of creation, there was infinite consciousness, and then there was the void. I mean, that's a duality right there, and everything kind of spirals out of that. Yeah. So I do think that the afterlife, same thing. Like, look, as I mentioned earlier, clearly there are problems with the afterlife process, with the reincarnation process. For example, when you die, okay, when you die, there are many near-death experience cases of people who, basically the shadow entities, the shadow beings, they show up and they pull you out of body and they try to pull you down the hall. Like one example being Howard Storm. He's a famous case. He talks about how he was dying in his hospital bed, and when he was finally dead, he saw these shadow beings standing right outside of the door of the hospital room, and they told him to come with them. And because he was confused, didn't know what was going on, he went with them, and then they led him deeper and deeper into darkness, where eventually they kind of pounced on him and were trying to rip him apart spiritually. So, in cases like that, you don't really see a pattern in those cases where, let's say, a light being shows up, like Jesus or your loving mom who passed away many years earlier, who kind of like lures you out of your body and pulls you down like a dark tunnel and like turns demonic and starts pouncing on you. I have not come across cases like that. It's relatively clear cut in the afterlife state what is what. And the reason why I say that is because when you're in your physical body, okay, when you're in your physical body or you're dreaming or something like that, your brain is very susceptible to having its signals being spliced into and hijacked, and therefore you getting false hallucinations. So it's very easy, for example, a person to get mentally plugged into by a demon to project the image of an alien or an angel or something like that, and that's doable. But when you're out of your body and you're no longer connected to your brain, now you are looking through your spiritual eyes. You're looking through your third eye, essentially, when you're out of body like that. And in that state, it's much harder to fool you because you're looking through your actual, psychic senses. So therefore, if you're encountering a positive being, more likely you are going to see it as an angelic form or something that you recognize on a spiritual level. Whereas a dark being will show up as a more like a shadowy figure, which in the case of Howard Storm is exactly the case. So there are anecdotes, there are cases where, let's say, an abductee is on a UFO and next to the alien is standing their dead mom or their dead dad or dead uncle or something, telling them to, hey, cooperate with the aliens. Well, most likely that is the alien telepathically influencing the person to imagine that there is, that their relative is there in order to gain cooperation. But you can't use that example to say that therefore, because that happens, then when you die in the afterlife state, near the white light at the end of the tunnel, if you see your dead mom or your dead uncle there, that's the aliens doing it, or it's all part of the same thing. Maybe, maybe not, but you can't say that it is for sure because those might actually be separate phenomena. Those might actually be separate things going on. So that's the level of like microscopic detail analysis that you have to do in order to distinguish these things. Because if you lump them all into one category, then of course you're going to throw your hands up and you're going to say like, okay, well, clearly this part here is deception. So this part here, because it sort of resembles it in a superficial way, it is also part of the same deception. And I see that mistake also being made by people like John Keel and Jacques Vallée, who look at UFO cases and they conflate the more absurdist, nonsensical elements of that phenomenon with the actual abductions and contactee stuff, which is like the more legit stuff. They put it all into the same bin. And then they say, well, because this is so nonsensical, therefore that's nonsensical. And then the entire thing is absurdist and nonsensical. And so therefore we just have this crazy phenomenon that we can't even recognize. And what we think are aliens are only its like crazy projections trying to fool us, trying to kowtow to our, cultural expectations. No, I mean, if you're painting with too broad of a brush like that, you're going to mix things together that shouldn't be mixed together, and you're just going to like wholesale dismiss things or accept things, or just kind of like painting with really fat crayons like a toddler does. You don't want to do that. You need to look at the details to really distinguish signal from noise.
Incredibly well said. And it's the nature of our egos that always wants us to put everything in a nice, neat little box, right? Of good versus evil, good versus bad. And it's frustrating actually to analyze the nuance, right? And I see everybody falls into the same trap in almost every religion or spiritual or philosophy, whatever you have, right? Of this kind of oversimplification, right? But it's tough, right? We only have so many hours of the day. Most people are working, jobs they hate, and I think you definitely would agree that there is this like loosening type plantation soul harvesting vibe going on, right? And so
Yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge that, but at the same time I just see this very destructive thinking with people who think like literally having a child is like a crime because you're bringing another soul into this hell realm. And guys, like your life doesn't have to be a pure hell. Like my life was almost hell, and I practiced manifestation to make a good life. Like I'm not like a multi-billionaire with 50 Bugattis and 100 girls on my side like Andrew Tate, but I've been able to carve out a nice little slice of paradise. And so it is tough though, because there is so much suffering in the world, but I just think anytime you go too far into any ideology, right, and you make it it's all or none, right, this is a pure hell realm or this is like paradise on earth, heaven, it seems to be somewhere in between. So I mean, it kind of goes back to Buddhism about this following the middle path, and I think we have to, especially now, de-radicalize ourselves, because otherwise I think we are fodder for higher entities or the control structure who wants to pin us one against another in terms of just endless infighting.
Yeah, I mean, and you can't really have nuance without observation and research and experience. Like the more of that you have, the more nuanced you have to become. So, honestly, I don't blame people for believing certain things, because I've been through a very long path myself. I mean, look, to give you an example, when I was 12 years old, I was subscribed to the Weekly World News, which is like Bat Boy and all those like National Enquirer type stuff.
Yeah.
And for about a period of like 2 to 3 months, I was reading that stuff thinking that it was real. I thought Bat Boy was real, until I realized, well, wait a minute, this isn't adding up. And then I woke up out of that. But I've had moments like that throughout my life where I did buy into things and I had a very unnuanced view, but the more research I did, the more people I connected with and networked with and data I got, the more I think I honed in on what's more objective than not, right? So I understand the process, and it's fine. The only thing people have to do is be open to improving the worldview as more data comes in. That's all you have to do, and then you just live your life, you experience, you research, you learn, and you kind of expand your data sources. And then you start kind of zeroing in on it, as long as you've got like clear thinking and you practice contemplation to kind of digest the ideas that you're getting into. But if you don't do that, if you just kind of like link it all to your ego identity, and you settle on something, at that point, yeah, I mean, you're kind of in a cult, essentially.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, and the nature of the ego is just that, right? We form false identity around who we are, and even if you're somebody who identifies as highly spiritual or a seasoned meditator, or I'm a victim of the soul trap or an escapee from the soul trap, that those are all stories you're telling yourself to form false identities. And I think a lot of what we're dealing with is the solution is to break free of that egoic pattern. I think that is the trap. And so, yeah, I'd like to maybe dive into that, like your thoughts on the ego, and as well how it ties into the nature of reality. More and more, I'm starting to conclude that reality is fundamentally conscious, right? Consciousness is fundamental, and I think that's really the big game that's been hidden from us. And if you dig into a lot of these occult systems, that's really the essence of what they're saying, is that consciousness is supreme. And I've been doing a deep Rupert Steiner deep dive a lot of his books on like occult
Yeah.
mysticism.
Like the German mystic Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah, Rudolf
Yeah.
Steiner. Yeah, he's fascinating stuff. And yeah, so it really does seem like all of these different mystery religions and occult systems are kind of hinting at the fact that ultimately we are, sovereign beings, and that consciousness is fundamental. So yeah, I would love to get kind of your worldview on that. And yeah.
Right. So yeah, okay, yeah. So it's kind of a big subject because you started off by, well, you mentioned Rudolf Steiner, for example, and I'm a fan of Rudolf Steiner. I wouldn't say I'm a big fan, but I'm a fan of Rudolf Steiner because some of the stuff he says is kind of, I don't really have a reference frame for it.
Right.
But other stuff he says is spot on. It's like finding diamonds in the rough, you know.
Yeah.
So that's how he is. So regarding that, you mentioned mystery schools, and he himself was he was a bona fide Rosicrucian. I mean, he had what you needed to be a Rosicrucian. Like, he had the psychic abilities, he had a very keen intellect, very strong sense of discernment. So he was a Rosicrucian. So if you want an example of a Rosicrucian, Rudolf Steiner is one. But he started his own thing as well, which he called anthroposophy. Okay, so he started the anthroposophical movement, and a lot of his books are quite valuable, but you have to like dig through a lot of weird stuff to get at the good stuff.
For sure.
And that's in there.
Yeah,
right.
100%.
Yeah, but the reason why I bring him up is because mystery schools, we're talking about secret societies. So that's what we're talking about with these mystery schools. And mystery schools go way back in time, probably to 40,000 years ago, as I mentioned earlier, if not off-world, somewhere. And so these mystery schools, the thing about them is, the reason why you have secret societies is because once one person and their little network becomes too knowledgeable, they become persecuted or looked down upon as alien or foreign by the rest of the population. And I'm sure many of you watching know exactly what I'm talking about because you were different yourself at some point in life, and other people could sense it. Other people could sense that you weren't part of the herd, and some of them were awed by it, and some of them were probably scared by it. Some of them were kind of intimidated by you being the way that you were. So you can imagine during the old days when they were burning witches and persecuting people for being sorcerers or whatever, if you had secret knowledge or secret technologies or abilities, you were pegged as that, and they're coming with the forks and the pitchforks and the torches to basically burn you down. So you had to have these secret societies where these smart people could kind of commune with each other and keep things on the down low and do the research and develop themselves, right, and to kind of network like that. Well, the issue is that sometimes they would split, or other groups would rise like that, where they were using that knowledge for exploitation, for an asymmetrical advantage over the rest of the population, whom they saw as useless eaters or cattle or people to manipulate for their own gain, right? Because, I mean, if you think about it, if you have the superior knowledge and technology and you saw yourself as superior to others, and those people are trying to kill you because you're different, you're going to have this animosity towards them. You're going to see them as less than dirt. And you're not going to have a moral compunction to start exploiting them as the animals that they are, just like we herd cows and pigs and sheep and goats and chickens and such, right? They saw the general population as that as well. But that's because they were lacking empathy and they were lacking a spiritual understanding, right? So those negative secret societies were doing that. And then you had the positive ones who were trying to figure out how to get the general population up to speed spiritually. But it takes a long time to kind of do it carefully, without triggering the cultish defense mechanism. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%.
So, yeah. So they had to be secret, but they had to also work on a longer time scale. So I do think that there are positive and negative secret societies, secret, mystery schools that are trying to influence the population in their own direction. One side corrupting it, dumbing it down, poisoning it, and the other side trying to give it knowledge of higher principles and trying to get them to be more aware, to essentially shake them out of the matrix, like Morpheus and them were doing in the movie. Okay, so mystery schools, one of the fundamental things that they know is that reality is fundamentally conscious. And funny enough, that is something that quantum physics would agree with as well. Although there are a lot of modern quantum physicists who kind of ridicule the idea that consciousness has any part in anything. Yeah. But I've looked at their reasons for why they believe that, and it's bullshit. I mean, as smart as they are, there are things that they're overlooking because they themselves are in a cult of materialism, and they don't want to get out of that cult. So any sort of counterpoint they dismiss irrationally, and then they just kind of like pseudo-skeptically justify their own ignorant position that matter is primary and that consciousness is merely an epiphenomenon of that. So I dismiss them because they don't really have a case. So quantum physics agrees with mystery schools that consciousness is the fundamental of reality. But see, that's not just a philosophical principle, that is also a practical principle, because as you discovered with the whole like idea of manifesting, for example, so manifesting, that is, some would say that it's an egotistical way of using that principle, but it doesn't always have to be, because sometimes your intellectual wishes are in line with your heart and with what is good for your soul path and your destiny and so on. So if it makes you a happier, more well-adjusted, more well-rounded person who can be out there, sharing ideas with others and uplifting others, then it's a good thing, even if you use manifesting to get that, right? I mean, so it's not like a completely satanic, evil, witchy thing to do. It's all about how you do it, from what place within you towards what ends. That is what determines whether it is good or whether it's simply black magic, right? So I'm not denying that some people use it for very, very egotistical reasons, like even to like curse their enemies, make people get sick, or give themselves a power advantage over others, which goes back to the whole secret society thing, where some of them use it for good and some of them use it for bad, right? So there's so many tools that are out there that we're not tapping into that can be used for good or bad, and that higher beings, whether they're aliens or secret societies or whatever, are using also for good and for bad. So there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's duality at pretty much every level of scale within this fractal matrix that we're in. Yeah, but as far as like consciousness goes, you asked about the ego. So let me get back to the ego. So the ego, all it is, it's your biological, your social programming that you have that creates like an artificial intelligence within your brain that runs on your brain hardware. Okay. And it's a false self, but it's also an avatar. It's like your video game avatar that you need to interact with society in the way that society expects. So in order to have a human personality, individuality, a social identity, that is what the ego is. It's like a mask, And so the only problem is if you think that that's all you are and you over-identify with it to the exclusion of impulses and values and drives that come from a higher part of you, like your spiritual self, like empathy, creativity, conscience, love, discernment, intuition. Those higher functions aren't necessarily functions of the ego, because the ego is more based on social and biological programming. So therefore, it's going to be more into survival, survival, physical survival, social survival, financial survival, right? And it's going to be overly obsessed with those things because that is what evolution has programmed into it. And unfortunately, we need that to some degree in order to just be effective as members of society. But as I said, it's only a problem when you over-identify with it to the exclusion of your higher principles. And so these dark secret societies, one of the key problems with the left-hand path, and I'm talking also about Crowley's system, okay? All these left-hand path systems, they falsely identify what their true self is. See, they identify with their ego, their shadow, the id, the lower parts of themselves, and they think that those drives, those urges, is who they truly are. Like that's their true nature. And actually Nietzsche, he himself also made that mistake of thinking that those drives were who you truly are. And he did not differentiate between the lower parts of yourself and the higher spiritual parts of yourself, because he didn't believe in a divine order. He didn't believe in the spirit. He only believed that in the more like Darwinian sense that, you're just, you're like a biological machine. And so therefore what nature has programmed into you is what your true drive is. And you have to pursue that in order to reach fulfillment in life. But by falsely identifying with the matrix construct, they were choosing the left-hand satanic path, not necessarily always realizing that that's what it was, So, hey, your video just cut out. Are you still there?
Yeah, I am.
I can sort of hear you, but your video kind of got frozen.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Tom?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Maybe it's let me know if I'm breaking up too much or if I pause, all right? Like maybe my connection's bad. All right, cool. So as I was saying, that the ego is a false construct that some people mistakenly identify with. And so anyway, point being that we don't really, we need to distinguish between the true parts of us and the false parts of us. And therefore, any of these higher tools that we use, whether it's manifesting or prayer or visualization or pursuing truth, it has to be based on those higher faculties rather than the lower ego constructs, which is what leads to tribalism and falsely identifying with a particular viewpoint and defending it even against truth itself.
Yeah, very, very well said. And I think to me, I see the ego as evolving from our survival instinct, right? And it is the our need to bring dominion over nature, right? Like a full presence would just be pure acceptance of your lot in life, whereas at a certain point our species said, no, like we can, we can build shelter, we can have fire, and then eventually build civilizations. It's just us like crawling out of our lot in life. And ego is a healthy thing that I think has just gone awry. Exactly as you said, it's like a AI program in the mind that's kind of gone rogue with some bad code in there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, in terms of secret societies, especially Christians obviously just blanket them all as nothing but Satan worshippers. But the more I'm reading a lot of these books, it really seems like they're guys digging deep into the nature of reality, and they're pulling from all sources, and they're very pragmatic, and they're experimental, and they're trying things. And I just kind of imagine today, like I got a few friends who are into like consciousness studies, I should say, and applied consciousness studies, like learning about nature of reality, trying different things, reporting back. And it'd be pretty sweet to have like some bros where we're all experimenting with consciousness, nature of reality, reporting back, and having like a little society where you encourage each other. But yeah, it's tough to not get too culty and then identified as a member of a everyone wants to be special, right? The ego wants to be special, so I think it's almost impossible to like have a group and it not turn egoic and then thinking that you're some super being or something.
Yeah. And to kind of tie it back to what we were talking about earlier with Trump. See, so the issue is if you're coming at, let's say, MAGA or America First or Trump from a purely Christian perspective, then you're going to be looking at Trump. You're going to be saying, okay, well, he stands for this or that, which I agree with, but there's this weird Masonic symbolism surrounding him. There's like weird associations with Zionists and other occult elements, right? And you start wondering, well, shoot, he's probably the Antichrist then, because he's clearly not as Christian as I think he is. But that's sort of a two-dimensional view of looking at it. You have to look at it more from the viewpoint of the breakaway civilization, the dark state, secret societies, both positive and negative. And when you start looking at it from that perspective, you start realizing that, yes, there is a war or some sort of conflict going on at that level, which we can't see other than its, second and third order effects. And so therefore, you might have high-level people who are involved in secret societies, but it doesn't guarantee that they're always involved in the satanic, cannibal, baby-eating, dark stuff, which we hear about on the internet. They might be involved in the more like Rosicrucian, higher, more benevolent elements of it, okay? So just because they use certain symbolism does not 100% guarantee that they're part of that satanic thing. Sometimes they're part of just like fraternal secret organizations that maybe tie into the breakaway civilization to some extent. So you have to look at that and look at it more deeply. And then from that framework, then determine, okay, well, if they're a part of that, are they part of the good part of that or the more negative or the more neutral part? And then you can make that determination about what their agenda ultimately is. So, yeah.
Very well said. Tom, could speak to you for hours. I do want to be respectful of your time, though. So I think I will wrap things up. I did have a couple questions from people watching, though. Just give me a second here. Let's see here. One asked, okay, from Ruby, a new listener. Thank you, Ruby. My cue for Tom. What is your reason for being public, and what future plans do you see yourself creating?
Great question. Good question. Yeah, thanks, Ruby. So the reason why I'm public is, well, let me try to think back in time. So the first time I went public is when I put together my theory of everything, which I was 17 and I had like a word processor and I typed up this document called What's Going On, okay? And I still have that document. Maybe I should upload it at some point. But in that document, I sort of proposed the idea that what we call the New World Order conspiracy, the whole human element, that the top of that pyramid was actually the bottom of the alien pyramid. And that so the aliens were actually controlling the dark human elements. So it was like a giant pyramid like that, okay? And that was sort of my theory at the time. That's when it first dawned on me. Now nowadays people are like, well, of course that's obvious because you can go on BitChute and learn all about it, right? But back then, this was 1997, and I didn't have the internet even at home, okay? So I was doing a lot of research through books and everything, and that's sort of what I put together. So I gave that out to my friends at a summer camp for them to read, and you can imagine how that went down. Most of them didn't even have the frame of reference for it. So eventually I put a version of that online on a website. So that's why I went public, because I wanted to get more feedback on these ideas using this new technology of the internet. And initially, because I didn't have an audience necessarily, I didn't treat it seriously. So I was way more sarcastic and snarky. I was more of an edgelord back then than ever now. And it wasn't until about 2002, when my audience really grew, that I realized, like, oh shit, I better grow up, and I better take this more seriously. So that's when I started taking it more seriously and like really committing myself to the ideals of truth and discernment and using your intuition and doing your research correctly and putting all the different pieces together. I did all that in order to help people save them time on their own path, so that they didn't have to go years and years and years and years to get to a similar point. I just wanted to put it out there. They can consider it, compare it to their own experience, their own research, and then voila, they can accomplish all that in a matter of months instead of years. So I did it for their sake. And part of me also did it to kind of rile up the matrix in a way, to kind of kick the negative forces in the shin by exposing some of the methods that they use to have an easy advantage over people. So if you take that away from them, now they have to try harder, and it really pisses them off. Like I've known people who have been under entity attacks or under like alien abduction problems, and by giving them key tips, they were able to wiggle out from under their control. And based on the retaliation they got and some of the feedback that they got from these entities, they didn't like it at all. And I got a lot of psychic attacks during those times as well, because I was messing with those entities and their projects by giving out this information. And so therefore these entities were not pleased with me either. Like, for example, my book, Discerning Alien Disinformation, when I put that out in 2008 and 2009, it caused a lot of waves. There were certain institutions focusing on the alien issue, and because that book came out and the members read it, they were able to see how other members in that group were following the alien programming line, and they called them out on it. And so that started a big fight within that group amongst the members, calling each other out about stuff. So yeah, I've been sort of a mischievous figure at times, putting this stuff out, but I do it for the sake of helping people lead better lives. That's why I do it. Now, as far as my future plans, I plan to get more into the technology side of things, because on the one hand, you have technologies that are like more technocratic, transhumanist, dark oriented, like Neuralink, for example, or a lot of this artificial intelligence and surveillance that they're trying to foist on us. But there's a whole other field of technology, like scalar physics and energy healing, things like that, which don't go down that road of ever increasing complexity and intellectualism and anti-human impulses. There's a whole other field of technology that is actually more pro-spirit, more pro-freedom, more pro-liberation. Like imagine if you did have like a little free energy unit. I mean, if you had a little free energy unit, if the power grid collapsed, you'd be relatively okay, because hey, you've got free energy to power your home, to desalinate water, to grow food with underground with like lights and such. So, there are technologies that I think are positive, that are not the typical things that we're seeing right now with genetic engineering and nanites and all that crazy New World Order crap. So I want to go into the route of like more spiritual, positive, helpful technologies. And the reason why I like that is because there are two things that can really disrupt this so-called matrix control system. One of those is disruptive knowledge, which helps people make more informed decisions. And the other is disruptive technology, which gives them more power, more leverage, and more convenience in order to disentangle themselves from a lot of the mechanisms of scarcity that keep people confined to very small lives. Like if you think about the green agenda and the whole like carbon tax stuff and how they're trying to get us to lower our carbon footprint, they're trying to get us to eat less, move less, live less, and to kind of like lock us down, almost like those factory farms where they keep those poor animals in cages, unable to move. That's what they want. See, I want the opposite. And I believe that a combination of disruptive technology and disruptive knowledge, focusing on spiritual knowledge, historical, alchemical knowledge, those two things are ways of freeing people from that control system. Because I think a lot of it does come down to ignorance versus knowledge, and I'm all for knowledge.
I love it, man. As well, I think that is probably a large reason why you look so damn healthy. We got all these people in the comments commenting on Mr. Montalk's. You just look incredibly healthy and young, and so people want to know what your secret is. Is that it? Just staying pure, helping your fellow man? Are you lifting? What's what can we do to be more like Tom? health wise?
Well, you just got to shave every day, and you got to use like special filters on your camera. I don't know. No, look. I mean, to be honest, the whole health subject is a big thing in itself, and I love biohacking. I love the idea of just trying to optimize your body because your body is the instrument through which your spirit is operating, right? So the more capable it is, the more things you can do. And I myself have struggled in the past with poor health, with low energy, for many reasons. Some of it psychic attacks, some of it just poor lifestyle habits. So I've learned a lot over the years about how to improve that. And I think the three things that you really need the most is sleep. Don't don't deprive yourself of sleep. I mean, that's more important than you think, especially in America. Like, American culture is so centered around like, oh, sleep is just this thing you do on the side, and if you only get 5 or 6 hours, not a big deal. And it's actually a good thing because you can just swig the coffee and you get more work done. Like, it shows that you've got this good work ethic. Like, you're a tough person if you get less sleep. But that's not really true, because it's imagine like diving underwater and living underwater, but you got to come up for air, and you're like, well, yeah, who needs air anyway? I'm only going to come up for like a split second, and you know what I mean? Like, you're going to start suffocating. Your brain's going to start winding down. You're not going to be a good underwater person because you're not coming up for air enough. So that's what sleep is. It is air for your spirit. You need it. Okay. So whether it's sleep or power naps or whatever, get those in. That's number one. Number two, when you eat food, do moderation. Like, some people can do carnivore very well. They can do keto very well. Some of them can't. So you got to find out what your body, your genetics are finally attuned to. It depends on your hormones. So you can only do that through trial and error. And if you eat something that makes you tired, like really screwed up in the head or something like that, don't ever eat that again, or don't eat as much of it again. So whether it's moderating carbs or making sure your protein is spaced out throughout the day, that's important. Learn to recognize vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So all the symptoms of deficiencies, if you have deficiencies for too long, then it kind of gets baked into your body. It kind of gets baked into your cellular structure, and then it's hard to reverse that by taking those supplements again. So if you can catch your deficiencies early on and correct them through either good, certain foods that have that stuff or certain supplements, then you can also fix those. And then the third thing I would say is stress. So if you can minimize, or if you can cut out unneeded sources of stress, like, for example, it's not really necessary every freaking hour of the day to read the news and traumatize yourself constantly. You don't have to do that every hour of the day. It's not, no. So when you scroll through social media and this person pisses you off and that pisses you off and blah, 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 I mean, that's like cortisol being dumped through your system constantly. And, stress is it's a very rapid aging mechanism. So if you can cut that down. Oh, and then the fourth thing is to actually get more energy into you, not only through breathing and sunshine and, a healthy lifestyle, but also, most importantly, doing things that kind of vitalize your soul, whether it is things that fascinate you, entertain you, that really make you happy, like dancing, music, whatever. Those things, it's a type of energy that you don't simply get from food or from supplements or even from breathing. It's like a higher level of loosh energy that is, it comes directly from your higher spirit, and it kind of lifts you up. And so when you feel like you're beaming from the inside with an actual like spiritual, positive, happy energy, that beaming, it signals to your cells to also be that way, to also be more living, more together, right? So that's why when you have extremely strong emotional blockages or you're in a very long depressive period, that also signals to your cells to contract and to start dying, to not really reproduce like they should. And then you start getting various like rapid aging or cancer. Not to say that all cancer is due to that, but it's just one of the contributing mechanisms, right? Right. So, just like cut down on spiritual and environmental stresses, get more sleep, and try to optimize your diet for your particular genetics. That's pretty much it.
Very well said. We're going to have Montalk on again, guys, just to go through his whole health regime in depth, because it seems there's so much interest here. And on the topic of dealing with energetic blockages, want to just quickly shout out my sponsor again, Eric Mace at macelifecatalyst.com. His email's above and in the description. If you're somebody dealing with energetic blockages, he will help you deploy the MACE Energy method, which is a very interesting way of letting go of energetic blockages very rapidly without having to tell a stranger what you're actually dealing with. So reach out to him, find out more info, see if it's right for you. If he doesn't help you, he won't charge you. So just wanted to throw that out there. Well, without further ado, Tom, want to be respectful of your time. I want to thank you tremendously for coming on again. It's always an absolute pleasure and an absolute treat. We're very appreciative and honored for having you on here. Is there any final words you want to leave people with? And as well, please let people know how they could best support you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Telegram, on Gab, YouTube, and on Amazon. And of course, my website, montalk.net. That's montalk.net. And I've got so many free books, articles. I've got tons of videos on my YouTube channel. So the only thing I really ask of people is to give it thought. Consider some of these ideas that I put out. I'm not asking you to fully believe it, but I do ask you to consider it as a possibility and to help it improve your viewpoint. Make you consider things that you maybe hadn't considered before. And the only reason I'm doing that is to not only save you time and trouble, but also to kind of get back at the Matrix. So if you want to help me kick the Matrix in the shin, then definitely keep on researching.
There you go, guys. Yeah. Check out his website, montalk.net. You can be lost there forever. A funny side note, I actually made a short novel based off his website stuff. I want to share that with you one day, Tom. It's pretty interesting. I just for fun as an experiment. But yeah, guys, montalk.net. Check out his books. Tom is incredibly humble, but his books are like works of art. So check them out, buy them, or be loosed and trapped forever in a soul trap. All right, Tom, thank you so much. Guys, I want to thank all of you for your support, for watching, you legends and fellow spellbreakers. I'm going to shut down the stream here. Please like, share, subscribe. I am shadow banned everywhere, but we maintain here. So thank you so much, guys, and goodbye.